The air in my studio always smelled of turpentine and dried oil paint, a comforting, if slightly acrid perfume. But lately, it felt suffocating. My canvases, once vibrant explosions of color, were now muted, shadowed things. I'd been trying to capture the exact shade of bruised twilight for weeks, but the hues eluded me, bleeding into murky browns and sickly greens. My hands trembled as I held the brush, a fine tremor that had become my unwelcome companion. It wasn't the physical exertion of painting that caused it. It was the gnawing in my gut, the phantom touch on my skin. My phone, a sleek black rectangle on the cluttered workbench, buzzed, shattering the strained silence. A lawyer's number. I almost didn't answer. Most calls these days felt like harbingers of more bad news, but this one felt different. He spoke with a clipped, professional tone, his voice a dry rustle of paper. He represented the estate of my grandmother. My estranged grandmother, Blackwood Manor. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since Leela. The lawyer droned on about wills and bequests, but my mind was already miles away, back in the suffocating stillness of that old house. He informed me with a distinct lack of ceremony that I was the sole beneficiary. The entire estate, including the manor. I hung up, the phone clattering against a half-finished sculpture. My breath hitched. The tremor intensified, a frantic drumming beneath my ribs. It was a place I'd tried to bury, a place I'd meticulously scrubbed from my personal history. And now it was mine, my inheritance, a gilded cage built on a foundation of fear. I packed a single duffel bag, the movements clumsy, disjointed. My art supplies remained untouched, the unfinished canvases like accusing eyes. The further I traveled, the thicker the air became, charged with a static hum that vibrated in my teeth. The landscape shifted, becoming more desolate, the trees gnarled and skeletal against a sky that seemed perpetually on the verge of weeping. The gates of Blackwood Manor were wrought iron, twisted into elaborate, unsettling patterns. The driveway was choked with weeds, the gravel crunching unnervingly under the tires of my car. And then I saw it. The manor loomed, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. It was larger than I remembered, more imposing. The stone was stained with damp, patches of moss clinging to its weathered facade like a parasitic skin. The scent of damp earth and decay hung heavy, mingling with something else, something faintly sweet, like overripe flowers. No birdsong, no rustling of leaves, just an unnerving stillness that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Hesitantly, I pushed it open. The hinges shrieked, a sound that clawed at my nerves. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light that pierced the gloom from the grimy windows. It was a scent that tugged at the edges of my memory, a forgotten perfume, a lullaby sung in a voice I'd tried to forget. I walked deeper into the house, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the decaying parquet floor. This was foolish. I was a grown man, a successful artist. There was nothing here to fear. Yet my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a desperate plea for escape. In a dimly lit study, amidst stacks of mildewed books and crumbling documents, I found it. A small, locked wooden box on the desk. Beside it, a tarnished silver key. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The lock clicked open with a soft, unsettling finality. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a single porcelain doll. It was Leela. Smaller than I remembered, but the same vacant blue eyes, the same painted smile that never quite reached them. Her dress, once a pristine white, was now yellowed and frayed. A delicate lace collar, a grim echo of its former elegance. Her hair, a cascade of impossibly perfect blonde ringlets, was matted in places as if it had been clutched too tightly too often. The sweet, cloying scent was stronger here, emanating from the doll itself. The room swam before my eyes. The memories, long suppressed, began to surface, sharp and brutal. The nursery, the rocking chair, the feeling of being watched. Then my gaze fell on a small, leather-bound ledger tucked beneath the doll. It was old, the pages brittle and foxed. I opened it, my fingers brushing against the rough texture of the paper. The handwriting was cramped, meticulous, and disturbingly familiar. It was my grandmother's. The entries were dated, detailing observations of me, of Leela. It wasn't a diary. It was a log of Warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. What was she keeping track of? And why did it feel like the entries were about to start again? The drive to Blackwood Manor was a blur of slick asphalt and the oppressive weight of unspoken history. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth beneath my grip. Each mile chipped away at the veneer of my composure, revealing the raw, trembling core beneath. I hadn't been back to this town, to this house, in 20 years, not since her. The gates groaned open, a rusted Morse swallowing my car whole. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound that echoed unnervingly in the sudden stillness. Blackwood Manor loomed before me, a gothic silhouette against a bruised sky. It was even more derelict than I remembered. Ivy clawed at the stone, its tendrils like skeletal fingers, and the windows were dark, vacant eyes staring out at nothing. This was where it all began. This was where she'd left me. I killed the engine. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. The air was damp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something faintly metallic like old blood. My grandmother, bless her strange, reclusive soul, had always been eccentric. Her letters, when they came, were filled with cryptic pronouncements and a loneliness that seeped through the ink. And then the lawyers had called, informing me of her passing and my inheritance. Blackwood Manor, the place I'd sworn I'd never return to. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows. The foyer was cavernous, a mausoleum of forgotten grandeur. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, draped from the chandelier, its crystals dulled with years of neglect. Each surface was a testament to time's relentless march, a silent chronicle of a life lived in isolation. I walked through the downstairs rooms, each one a tableau of faded elegance. In the library, rows upon rows of leather-bound books stood sentinel, their spines cracked, their pages brittle. I pulled one out at random, the title obscured by grime. The pages crackled as I turned them, releasing a puff of dry, papery dust that tickled my nose. It smelled of forgotten stories, of secrets buried deep. My grandmother's study was the most unsettling. Unlike the other rooms, it felt lived in, not recently, but a deep, ingrained sense of occupancy. A heavy oak desk dominated the space, littered with papers, quills, and an inkwell that was still half full. A single, unshaded bulb hung precariously from the ceiling, casting a harsh, yellow light. On the desk, beneath a thick layer of dust, I found a small, leather-bound diary. My grandmother's hand, spidery and shaky, filled its pages. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the worn cover. This felt like an intrusion, a violation of her privacy, even in death. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need for answers, compelled me. I opened it. The entries were sparse, rambling, filled with a growing paranoia. She spoke of a presence, a watcher that had been there long before her. Her words were a descent into a private madness, a spiral I recognized with a sickening lurch. Then I saw it, a single, crudely drawn sketch on one of the later pages. It was a doll with porcelain skin, button eyes, and yarn hair. Leela. My breath hitched. The drawing was crude, almost childlike, yet it radiated a palpable malevolence. Beneath it, scrawled in a frantic hand, were the words, "She watches, she waits, she remembers." A floorboard creaked upstairs. My head snapped up, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound was distinct, deliberate. It wasn't the settling of an old house. It was the sound of a footstep. I froze, straining my ears, every nerve ending screaming at me. The house was supposed to be empty. I was supposed to be alone. Then, from the depths of the manor, a faint, tinkling sound drifted down. A music box. A melody I hadn't heard in years. A melody that had once been my lullaby. There was I imagining it. There was the stress finally getting to me. I told myself it was just the wind, whistling through a broken pane, playing tricks on my ears. My gaze fell back to the diary, to the crude drawing of Leela. I looked towards the closed door, a primal instinct urging me to flee, to run from this place and never look back. But a more stubborn, more dangerous part of me, the part that was still the boy who had faced her before, refused to budge. I had to know, what was this place? What had my grandmother been so terrified of? And who or what was playing that music box? The floorboard above my head groaned again. This time it was followed by a soft, shuffling sound. My breath hitched. I told myself it was the wind, that the old house was simply breathing its usual, unsettling symphony. But the silence that followed was too heavy, too expectant. It felt watched. I slowly pushed myself up from the dusty rug, my muscles stiff and protesting. My eyes scanned the shadowed hallway leading to the grand staircase. Nothing. I had been so certain the house was mine alone, a sanctuary from the city's cacophony, a place to finally wrestle with the ghosts that haunted my canvases. My grandmother, bless her reclusive soul, had left me everything. And I, in my desperate need for solitude, had accepted. Now standing here in the suffocating quiet, I wondered if I had inherited more than just decaying timbers and forgotten heirlooms. Leela. I hadn't thought of her, not really in years, not consciously, but he was always there, a phantom limb of memory, an ache in my artistic soul. I had to know. The need was a physical thing, a gnawing hunger. I moved towards the staircase, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the bare wood. Something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. My fingers, slick with a nervous sweat, traced the banister. It was smooth, worn down by generations of hands, but beneath the polish, I felt a subtle, almost imperceptible roughness. The second floor was a labyrinth of closed doors, each one a potential hiding place. I started with the room at the end of the hall, the one my mother had always referred to as the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. A morbid curiosity had always clung to that room. My grandmother, a woman of strict routines and even stricter pronouncements, had kept it locked. The key, when I found it tucked away in a velvet-lined jewelry box, felt unnaturally heavy in my palm. The lock turned with a reluctant groan. The door swung inward, revealing a space that defied logic. It was a small room, barely larger than a closet, but crammed with filing cabinets that stretched from floor to ceiling. They were old metal behemoths, their surfaces scarred and dented. The air inside was stale, heavy with the metallic tang of old paper and a cloying perfume I couldn't quite place. It wasn't my grandmother's usual lavender. This was cloying, almost sickly sweet. I pulled open the first drawer. It screeched in protest, its contents a jumble of faded documents. Birth certificates, property deeds, brittle newspaper clippings. Nothing that struck me as particularly illicit. The second drawer yielded more of the same. I was about to give up, to dismiss the room as just another eccentric quirk of my grandmother's, when my fingers brushed against something soft, something that didn't belong amongst the rigid paper. It was a small, worn book, no title on the spine. I pulled it out. The cover was a faded, floral fabric, the kind one might find on a child's quilt. My heart began to thud, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I opened it. Pages were filled with elegant, spidery handwriting, my grandmother's unmistakable script. But the words, they weren't about finances or family trees, they were descriptions. My child. My hands began to shake. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the entries, each one more disturbing than the last. Dates, incidents, observations of a young boy's behavior, his fears, his nightmares. And then a name written in bold, underlined letters, Leela. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the book shut, the sound echoing in the confined space. My mind raced, fragments of buried memories clawing their way to the surface. The yellowed wallpaper in my childhood bedroom, the scratchy wool of a blanket. I stumbled out of the warden's office, the book clutched in my hand. My eyes darted around the hallway, seeking an escape, a way to outrun the rising tide of panic. And then I saw it. My grandmother had never mentioned it. I knelt before it, my fingers tracing the unfamiliar patterns. A faint, sweet scent wafted from it, the same sickly perfume that had permeated the office. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was Leela. He was exactly as I remembered her. Porcelain skin, chipped and cracked in places, painted blue eyes staring with an unnerving blankness, a perpetually fixed smile, too wide, too knowing. Her dress, a faded lace creation, was immaculately preserved. She seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, an unholy luminescence. A guttural cry escaped my lips. This wasn't just a doll, he was here. He had always been here, and the house was not empty. My gaze snapped back to the doll. Her painted eyes seemed to follow me, to bore into my very soul. A single, perfect tear of dried resin traced a path down her cheek. Was it real, or was it just my mind? Fractured by years of repression, playing tricks on me, my breath hitched. It felt, watched. I was still in my grandmother's study, the air thick with the scent of decaying paper and something faintly metallic, like old pennies. The single lamp cast long, dancing shadows that made the taxidermied owl on the bookshelf seem to swivel its head. I'd been trying to organize the chaotic piles of my grandmother's belongings, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for why she'd kept me at arm's length, why this house and everything in it felt so wrong. My fingers, stained with ink from a spilled fountain pen, trembled as I sifted through brittle invoices and faded correspondence. Then the shuffling came again, closer this time. It was a dry, scraping sound, like brittle leaves skittering across a stone floor. My eyes darted to the ceiling. I could almost see the shape of a small, bent figure, hunched and waiting. My muscles tensed, a primal urge to bolt screaming through my veins, but I stayed. I wouldn't be driven out. Not again. I stood, the old chair creaking in protest. Each step I took towards the door felt like wading through molasses. It wasn't just the draft from the ill-fitting windows. It felt malevolent. It sounded like my own name, distorted, drawn out, laced with a childlike malice. Dion. I spun around, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Nothing. I gripped the edge of the desk, my grip tight. It was the doll. It had to be, but how? How could a thing of porcelain and thread affect me like this? Years later, miles away, the memory of its painted smile, the chipped, vacant eyes flashed behind my own. I needed to find it. I needed to see it, to confirm it was real, that this wasn't just my mind unraveling. I moved through the house, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the bare floorboards. Every creak, every groan of the ancient timbers sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me. The house felt alive, watching my every move. In the hallway, the grandfather clock, which hadn't ticked since I arrived, suddenly chimed, a deep, resonant gong that vibrated through the floor. It struck once, then fell silent, leaving an even more profound stillness in its wake. The air here was stagnant, heavy with the accumulated dust of decades. This was where I'd last seen her, years ago, before everything. The memory was a fractured shard, sharp and painful. Taking a deep breath, I ascended. Each step groaned under my weight. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers clumsy with apprehension. When the bare bulb flickered to life, it cast a weak, jaundiced glow, illuminating a chaotic landscape of forgotten furniture, shrouded in white sheets like ghostly figures. And then I saw it. In the far corner, perched precariously on a stack of old hatboxes, was Leela. Her porcelain face, still eerily pristine, seemed to glow in the dim light. Her painted eyes, fixed and unblinking, met mine. The familiar, unnerving smile was there, wider now, more predatory. A small, intricately carved wooden rocking horse sat beside her, its runners worn smooth. As I watched, mesmerized and horrified, the rocking horse began to move, a slow, rhythmic creak, 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 as if an invisible child were riding it. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The air grew thick, suffocating. The scent of dust and decay was now mingled with that same metallic tang, stronger, cloying. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated glee, a sound that promised unspeakable things. I forced myself to look away from the doll, to scan the room, searching for the source of the sound, for any rational explanation. My gaze fell upon a heavy, locked wooden chest in the center of the room. It was unlike anything else up here, too solid, too deliberate. My grandmother had been a pack rat, but this felt different. It felt important. My eyes drifted back to Leela. He was no longer on the hatboxes. He was closer, much closer, sitting on a small, child-sized chair that hadn't been there a moment before. The rocking horse was still moving. The giggle was louder now, a maddening, insistent sound. I could feel a prickling sensation on my skin, like 1,000 tiny needles. My grandmother's journal. I remembered her mentioning it, tucked away somewhere safe. She'd written about secrets, about things that were better left undisturbed. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman, but now I wasn't so sure. I remembered her mentioning a locked room, a place she called the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. Could that be where she kept her secrets? And if Leela was here, influencing me, what horrors were contained within those forbidden files? What had my grandmother been trying to hide? The silence in the old house was a living thing, a heavy blanket that pressed in on me. It was an empty silence. I'd been staring at my hands, the tremor in my fingers a betrayal of the calm I was trying to project. Leela. The name itself felt like a sliver of ice in my gut. It was the doll. It had to be. I needed to work. Canvases were stacked in the studio, waiting. My paints still fresh, a vibrant rebellion against the decay of this place. I'd been avoiding it, the studio, ever since I'd found Leela tucked away in that dusty attic trunk. But the urge was growing, a gnawing in my gut that only creation seemed to soothe, or at least distract. The studio was a cavern of forgotten light. Cobwebs draped the easels like macabre lace. The air was thick with the ghost of turpentine and linseed oil, a scent that usually grounded me, but now felt tainted. I pulled out a fresh canvas, the stark white a challenge. My brushes felt heavy in my hand. My mind, however, was a chaotic storm. I squeezed cerulean blue onto my palette, then a violent cadmium red. The colors felt wrong, too bright, too alive for the gray despair that clung to me. I began to paint, not with intention, but with a desperate urgency. My movements were jerky, erratic. The brush strokes became thick, aggressive. The shape that emerged was not conscious. It was a contortion, a twisted effigy of something that had once been human. Limbs were elongated, unnatural, and then the eyes. As I stepped back, a wave of nausea washed over me. It was Leela, not the doll itself, but the essence of her, the pure, unadulterated malice that had seeped into the very fabric of my childhood. Another canvas. Ochre, burnt sienna, a sickly viridian green. I worked faster, a frenzy taking hold. The image coalesced into a scene, a twisted memory, the familiar wallpaper of my childhood bedroom, but warped, the floral pattern writhing like serpents, and in the corner a small figure hunched and silent, the doll, but this time it wasn't just watching, it was reaching. A slender porcelain arm, impossibly long, stretched towards the cowering child. My child self. My breath hitched. I dropped the brush, my hand shaking uncontrollably. I stumbled back, my eyes darting around the studio. A soft, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across stone. I strained my ears, my body rigid. Nothing, just the frantic, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. But the feeling persisted, the undeniable sensation of being watched, of a presence that was both ancient and insidiously new. My gaze fell on the paintings. They weren't just art anymore. They were windows. They were a testament to Leela's power, a power I had so foolishly underestimated. I'd thought I was confronting the past, but I was merely opening the door wider for it to consume me. My eyes landed on a particularly disturbing piece, a swirling vortex of black and crimson. It was the first one I'd painted after finding the doll. I hadn't understood it then, the raw, primal fear it conveyed. Now it was terrifyingly clear. It was the fear of being trapped, of being consumed. I needed answers, not about the doll, not anymore. I needed to understand why. Why this house? Why this inheritance? My grandmother. He had been a strange woman, reclusive, her eyes always holding a distant, haunted look. What did she know? What had she kept hidden? I remembered the old filing cabinet in the dusty back room, the one I'd dismissed as containing mundane household records. The room had been labeled, in faded ink, Warden's Office, files that shouldn't exist. A morbid curiosity, a desperate need for context, tugged at me. Perhaps there, amongst the forgotten papers, I might find a clue, a reason for the madness that was now consuming my art, my life. The house seemed to hum with a silent anticipation. As I reached for the doorknob of the back room, a faint, tinkling sound echoed from upstairs. It was the sound of a music box, a sound I hadn't heard in years, a sound that belonged to a childhood I'd tried to forget. There was Leela playing it, or was it just the wind whistling through a broken pane? I'd been staring at my hands, the tremor in my fingers a constant, unwelcome companion. They were my tools, my lifeblood, yet they betrayed me now. My grandmother's will had been cryptic, a series of legalistic pronouncements that led me here, to this mausoleum of a house. But it was the codicil, the addendum tucked away like a dirty secret, that truly brought me to this decaying estate. It mentioned a specific room, a place I hadn't dared to venture into for decades, a place I'd tried to scrub from my memory, along with everything it contained. The scent of decay, of forgotten lives, hung thick in the air as I forced the heavy oak door open. It groaned in protest, a sound that echoed the unease coiling in my gut. The room was small, cluttered, a stark contrast to the cavernous, echoing halls. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with boxes and brittle papers. In the center, beneath a tattered oilcloth, sat an object I knew with a sickening certainty. My breath hitched. It was Leela, still here, smaller than I remembered, yet infinitely more imposing. Her painted smile seemed to mock me, her glass eyes, devoid of any warmth, fixed on something beyond my perception. My grandmother's handwriting, spidery and frail, graced the edges of a stack of papers on a nearby desk. I picked them up, my fingers sticky with dust. These were not casual notes. These were records. The first few entries were mundane enough, accounts of finances, household repairs. Then the tone shifted. The entries became more fragmented, punctuated by frantic scribbles and underlined words. She watches, one read, the doll, always the doll. My hands trembled harder. I forced myself to focus, to push back the rising tide of panic. This was why I was here, to understand. Further into the stack, I found a locked metal box, tarnished and heavy. The key, thankfully, was still in the lock. I turned the key. The tumblers clicked, a sharp, decisive sound. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay more documents, and then I saw it. A small leather-bound journal. The cover was embossed with a single unsettling symbol. It was familiar. I'd seen it etched into the base of Leela's wooden cradle when I was a child. Opening the journal felt like breaking a sacred oath. The pages were filled with my grandmother's script, but this was different. This was raw. This was fear. She wrote of Leela's arrival not as a gift, but as a burden. She wrote of rituals, of desperate attempts to contain something she couldn't comprehend. A murmur in the walls, then they grew. They spoke of hunger, of needing to be fed. Fed, my stomach churned. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the desperate words. My grandmother had been trying to appease whatever malevolence resided within the doll. She'd been trying to protect us. Then I found the section that made my breath catch in my throat. It detailed a specific night, a night that had been a gaping wound in my memory for years. The night of the storm, the night my parents had been away, the night I'd been left alone with Leela. Her words painted a picture I had suppressed with every fiber of my being. The feeling of icy fingers tracing my skin. The doll sitting on my dresser, its head tilted, its painted eyes seeming to glow in the flickering lamplight. He saw, the entry declared, the ink smudged as if by tears. He saw what he is, the pact, the price. A pact, a price, what pact, what price? The words swam before my eyes. I remembered the scratching sound, the soft, persistent scratching that seemed to come from inside the walls, from inside Leela herself. My grandmother's journal detailed her own attempts to intervene that night, her frantic efforts to shield me, to break the doll's hold. But he had been too late. Something had already happened, something that had scarred me, that had left me broken. She wrote of a desperate measure, a final act to sever Leela's influence, a place where such things could be contained, where their power could be neutralized. The warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. It was a name I'd heard whispered in hushed tones by my grandmother, a place of last resort, a place for things that defied understanding. He had taken Leela there, hidden her away, hoping to bury the horror along with it. But Leela had found her way back. Leela had always found her way back. My gaze drifted back to the doll, its porcelain face serene, its smile unwavering. I could feel its attention, a palpable weight. It knew I had found the journal. It knew I remembered. The scratching sound began again, faint at first, then growing louder. It wasn't in the walls this time. It was coming from the doll, from inside Leela. What had she truly done that night? And what had my grandmother done to stop her? The air in the grandfather clock's belly was thick, cloying like dust and old secrets. I'd pried the back panel open, the aged wood groaning in protest. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, catching on cobwebs that draped like funeral shrouds. I wasn't sure why I'd come here. A hunch, a desperate need to find something other than Leela's mocking smile in every shadow. The scratching had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse, a pregnant hush that vibrated with unseen menace. My fingers brushed against something hard, cool, nestled amongst the clock's intricate gears. My heart gave a lurch. Not Leela's, this was different. The leather was worn smooth, the edges softened with age. I pulled it free, my hands trembling. The pages were brittle, filled with a spidery, looping script. It wasn't familiar, not like my grandmother's cramped hand. This was. I flipped it open, my flashlight beam illuminating the first entry. She watches, always watches. The words snagged in my throat. I scanned further, dates, cryptic notations, desperate pleas. The entries spoke of a growing unease, a sense of being observed, a creeping paranoia that mirrored my own. Then a name. Dean, he is the key, the vessel. She needs him. A wave of nausea washed over me. Leela, she needed me, but what was this journal? Who had written it? I kept reading, my breath catching in my chest. The entries detailed a series of rituals, preparations. This wasn't just a haunted house, it was a cage being meticulously constructed. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, the journal clutched tight. Nothing, just the empty hallway, bathed in the weak moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on my skin. I backed out of the clock, my eyes darting around the cavernous hall. The portraits on the walls seemed to sneer, their painted eyes following my every move. I needed to get out. Now, the journal was proof, wasn't it? Proof that this was real, that I wasn't just losing my mind. I hurried towards the front door, footsteps echoing unnervingly. It wouldn't budge. I twisted harder, desperation clawing at me, locked from the outside. Panic flared, sharp and hot. I tried the windows, each one sealed shut as if they'd been welded in place. The heavy velvet curtains, which I'd sworn I'd left pulled back, now hung heavy and still, obscuring the glass. A faint, sweet perfume like rotting lilies filled the air. I stumbled back, my gaze falling on the grand staircase. It was just the light. I told myself, just my overactive imagination. But the shape, it seemed to shift, to beckon. The house seemed to absorb them, offering no reply. I felt a phantom chill, a breath of cold air on the back of my neck, though no breeze stirred. The scratching started again, this time not from inside the walls, but from the other side of the front door. A soft, insistent tap, 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 accompanied by a low, childlike hum. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide. The journal felt heavy in my hand, a burden and a potential weapon. I needed to find another way out, but the house seemed to be actively resisting me. Doors I knew were unlocked were now jammed. Hallways I'd navigated countless times seemed to twist and turn, leading me back to where I started. The portrait's eyes gleamed. A low giggle, high and thin, echoed from the upper floors. It was Leela's laugh. It was the sound that had haunted my nightmares for 20 years. It was the sound of the trap snapping shut. I was still in the house. Was I truly alone, or was the house itself the warden, and I merely another file to be filed away? I scrambled up the grand staircase, the journal clutched in my sweaty palm. The scratching at the door grew louder, more insistent. The humming intensified, a discordant lullaby. I reached the landing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. At the far end, a single door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. It was the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, a place I'd deliberately avoided. But now it felt like my only hope. Would the answers I sought be there, or would it be another dead end? Another layer of Leela's insidious game? The air in the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, was thick with the scent of dust and decay, a cloying perfume that clung to my lungs. My hands, slick with sweat, trembled as I sifted through the brittle pages of the journal. Each entry was a testament to a slow, meticulous descent into madness, a chilling chronicle of a mind warped by something ancient and hungry. The cramped handwriting, once elegant, devolved into frantic scrawls, detailing rituals meant to bind, to appease, to contain. Contain what? Leela. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The journal wasn't just a record, it was a blueprint. My grandmother, this woman I barely knew, hadn't just been a victim. He had been a guardian. He had failed. The last entry, scrawled with a desperate urgency that vibrated through the paper, spoke of a final, desperate measure. A sacrifice, not of blood but of will. A deliberate surrender, a binding of her own spirit to the house to keep Leela from breaking free. My breath hitched. The house. It wasn't just old wood and creaking floorboards. It was a cage, and the bars were weakening. Leela was stirring. He was aware of my presence, of my intrusion into her prison. I thought of the artist I used to be, the one who found solace in creation, whose hands could coax beauty from clay and canvas. That Dean felt like a ghost, a distant memory, but the journal, it offered a flicker of something else. A weapon, not of steel or fire, but of understanding. My grandmother had tried to contain Leela. He had understood Leela's nature, and her final act, her surrender, had been a form of resistance, a way to anchor Leela, to keep her tethered to this decaying place. I had to leave. The instinct screamed at me, a primal urge to flee the suffocating stillness. If my grandmother had fought, then so could I had to. Rising unsteadily, I left the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, closing the heavy door behind me. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the stillness. It felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I walked, each step a deliberate act of defiance. The house seemed to resist me, the floorboards groaning under my weight as if protesting my passage. The portraits on the walls, their eyes following me, seemed to twist into sneering caricatures. The once familiar scent of lavender and old paper was now laced with something metallic, something acrid. I found myself in the grand hall, the place where it all began. And there, at the foot of the sweeping staircase, sat Leela. He was exactly as I remembered her, and terrifyingly more. Her china face, once cherubic, now held a subtle, unsettling smirk. Her glass eyes, the color of faded forget-me-nots, seemed to gleam with an intelligence that was far too sharp, far too ancient. He was smaller than I remembered, a delicate thing of lace and porcelain, yet she filled the entire space with a palpable malevolence. My throat was dry. I couldn't speak. All the carefully rehearsed words, the defiant pronouncements I'd conjured in the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, had evaporated like mist. She didn't move, she didn't need to. The air around her shimmered with a silent energy, a pressure that pushed against my chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. I could feel her gaze, a physical weight, probing, dissecting, searching for the weakest point in my resolve. My hands clenched into fists. The journal's words echoed in my mind, a sacrifice of will, a binding. My grandmother had surrendered to anchor Leela. He had given up her own freedom to keep Leela trapped. But what if that wasn't the only way? What if understanding her prison was the key to breaking it? I took a step forward, then another. Leela's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down my spine. Her painted lips parted slightly, as if about to speak, but no sound emerged. It reminded me of every failure, every moment of weakness. My own breath was shallow, ragged. I could feel the edges of my own mind fraying, the carefully constructed walls of my sanity beginning to crumble. But deep within, a spark ignited, a defiance born of desperation. This was my house, my inheritance, my nightmare, and I wouldn't let her claim it or me any longer. I remembered the rituals, the binding. My grandmother hadn't just trapped her, he had anchored her, and anchors could be severed. I don't belong here, I managed to croak out, my voice raspy and weak. Leela's smirk widened, a horrifying, inhuman thing. I am trapped. I pushed on, forcing strength into my voice, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. And I am not my prison. The air crackled, a hint of something, unsettled. Was I imagining it, or had I actually struck a nerve? What would happen if I pushed further? The dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, piercing the gloom of the warden's office. Files that shouldn't exist. They swirled like frantic gnats, each a tiny, forgotten story. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the suffocating quiet. Leela. He was still there in the corner, her painted smile a frozen rictus, but the oppressive weight that had pressed down on me for days, for years, felt lighter, not gone, never gone, but thinned like a veil stretched too thin. I'd done something. I didn't know what. When that surge of raw, desperate anger had ripped through me, when I'd screamed her name, pleaded with the memory of her, something had shifted. It wasn't a physical blow, not a shattering of porcelain or a splintering of wood. It was deeper, a psychic tremor, perhaps, a severing of a tie that had bound me to her malice. My fingers, still slick with the strange, viscous residue from the doll's chipped eye, trembled as I reached for one of the aged folders piled on the scarred oak desk. Warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. The label was handwritten, the ink faded. But the stark implication was clear. These weren't standard records. My grandmother, the quiet woman who smelled of lavender and old paper, had kept secrets, dark ones. I pulled a file free. The paper felt brittle, ready to crumble into dust. Inside, not medical notes, not legal documents, photographs, faded, sepia-toned images of children. And in some of them, almost an afterthought, a blur in the background, or a tiny figure clutched in a small hand. Was Leela? My stomach twisted. These weren't just children, they were me asterisk, or rather echoes of me. There was the girl with the scraped knees crying by the old oak tree, a silent, watchful presence, a different file. This one contained brittle, yellowed newspaper clippings, articles about missing children, their faces staring out from smudged print. The dates stretched back decades. The same pattern. A child, then Leela, always Leela. My hands shook so violently I had to set the papers down. The air in the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, was thick with the scent of decay and something else. Something metallic like old pennies and fear. Leela stirred, a faint rustle like dry leaves skittering across a floor. I didn't look. I couldn't. I fumbled with another folder. This one was thicker, more recent, and the handwriting, her neat, precise script. It detailed her attempts to understand. Her own childhood memories, fragmented and terrifying, of the doll. She'd been trying to fight it too, trying to contain it, to protect me. A soft click, then another. The sound was small, insignificant, but it echoed in the vast emptiness of the room. It was Leela. I could feel her shifting, her porcelain limbs articulating with a faint, dry scraping. My gaze was drawn, against my will, to the corner. Leela was no longer where I'd last seen her. She sat on the edge of the desk now, closer. Her head was tilted, as if listening. Her painted eyes, once vacant, seemed to hold a spark of something ancient and hungry. The shaft of light, my only solace, had receded, leaving the room in deeper twilight. I finally understood. It wasn't just about me. It was a cycle. My grandmother had tried to break it. She'd failed. And now it was my turn. But what was the resolution? What was the aftermath? But the doll was still here. And the files, of understanding the scope of the horror. My grandmother hadn't just inherited a house, she'd inherited a curse, and she'd passed it on. I looked at Leela, at the unnerving stillness that radiated from her. I had pushed back, I had fought, but had I truly won, or had I merely paused the inevitable? The faint, dry, scraping sound came again, closer this time. The metallic tang in the air intensified. Had I truly broken free, or had I just opened a new door?